Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity on vacation. Here in his place is Scott Bertram, General Manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he also lectures in journalism. He is the director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. He's the host of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and he is also the host of the Political Beats podcast and Wasn't That Special? 50 years of Saturday Night Live. Scott, great to have you back with us.
Greg, always a pleasure to be on the Friday edition, which, as we all know, much different than the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday edition. The Friday edition, very special.
It is. We finally made it to the end of this crazy week edition of the Three Martini Lunch, and lately that has been extremely valuable. Before we get to our three martinis today, a quick follow-up on one of yesterday's actual four martinis, and that was the prisoner swap that wonderfully brought a number of Americans home. But as we said yesterday, the curious question is, what did we give up, or what did other nations give up in order to get these people freed? And now we know. Jim, in his morning jolt today, just before he exited for vacation, says most notable on the list is a guy named Vadim Krasikov, a Russian assassin who straight up murdered a Russian dissident in broad daylight in a public park in Berlin with children watching. This was back in 2019. Krasikov was on a bike following his target to a crowded children's playground at lunchtime, a popular summer spot in a central city park filled with families and workers. As the man entered the park, Krasikov pedaled close behind. Not far from the swings, he pulled a pistol from a rucksack, shot his target in the back, leaving his victim, a former Chechen insurgent leader, slumped on the ground. Krasikov got off his bike and calmly fired twice into the man's head, watched by children and parents. Since there were so many witnesses, that certainly assisted in the conviction. But he is free now, as is Vladislav Kliushin, convicted of participating in a $93 million insider trading scheme that involved hacking corporate computer networks. Roman Seleznev, convicted in 2016 by a federal court in Washington state for orchestrating a cyber attack on thousands of American businesses. The guy whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce smuggled American-made electronics and ammunition to support Moscow's war efforts in Ukraine, using front companies to hide his operations. And then Artem Doltsev and his wife Anna Doltseva, a Russian couple who posed as Argentine expatriates living an ordinary life in Slovenia and were sentenced to 19 months.
That sounds like a movie right there, Greg. I don't know about you, but...
It does. It sounds like the
$12 to see that.
Sounds like the Americans, only in Slovenia. So it's going to be the Slovenians on FX at some point soon. But the weird part of that story is apparently their kids found out on the flight to Moscow that they were actually Russian and not Argentinian. So talk about keeping your cover well. So Jim's argument here is that every time we pay steep prices like this, it only encourages the Russians to take more Americans the next time some come into the country. So I don't know if that's going to be a major incentive that we're going to go through this all again, but it's good to have them home. But we, again, paid a pretty stiff price, I think.
You're not getting something for nothing. That's not why Russia is going through these machinations with Brittany Griner and with these most recent prisoners. And so there's always going to be something. Again, it's not something for nothing. There's always something for something. And what's the level of that? How intense is the price? But of course, it will encourage more if possible. There's extreme leverage on behalf of the Russians because, stereotyping a bit here, we care a bit more about getting our people back than perhaps Vladimir Putin cares about getting his people back.
When he takes people prisoner who shouldn't be prisoner, like Evan Gershkovich and others, the only people you're going to be able to swap are actual criminals that Russia wants back. And even when you do make a trade, whatever Brittany Griner's crime was it cannabis oil or something marijuana related?
Was.
In exchange
it goes against
arms dealer.
my rule of thumb, which is never bring any sort of paraphernalia to foreign countries. But that's just me.
Yes. So she wasn't completely innocent like, Gershkovich was, but trading her for a convicted notorious arms dealer that was so notorious that they made a Nicolas Cage movie out of it, like Jim mentions, seems like a little unequal there. But anyway, we're glad our people are home and hopefully no more Americans get snatched here. All right, let's talk about our first martini here. Not really sure it's good or bad. We're just going to talk about the state of the Veepstakes because there seem to be more and more indications that Kamala Harris is going to pick Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro as her running mate, but she is still vetting some other folks, as we'll talk about in just a second. But in terms of Shapiro, the fact that Harris is starting her barnstorming tour of the country with her running mate in Philadelphia seems like a tell for a lot of people. Shapiro also canceled some of the things he already had on his schedule, like fundraisers in New York State, and that's a sign for more people. But not everybody loves this idea. The Daily Beast with a story about a sexual harassment case, not directly involving Shapiro, but they're saying he helped to cover it up. They say Shapiro is the betting favorite to be number 2 on the Democratic ticket, but his handling of a sexual harassment case may hurt his chances. The issue has come to a head with a little-known women's rights organization urging Vice President Harris to think twice. In a statement headlined Governor Shapiro's failures enabled sexual harassment, the National Women's Defense League said that the Harris vetting team should consider the handling of past complaints of sexual harassment inside the Pennsylvania governor's office. The group claims to be a nonpartisan organization dedicated to preventing sexual harassment. And so Shapiro has come under fire, the Daily Beast says, for his administration's move last year to pay nearly $300,000 to settle a sexual harassment claim against one of his longtime aides, and the deal involved a non-disclosure agreement. So the group says Governor Shapiro's office should have done a better job preventing sexual harassment happening by former Cabinet Secretary Mike Vereb, including protecting the survivor who bravely came forward. There's a couple of other things that could be a target-rich environment for Shapiro if he is, in fact, the choice. But, Scott, do you think he's still the odds-on favorite? And do you think once the Democrats fall in love with him like they suddenly fell in love with Kamala, that this will get buried in the national press?
Well, first of all, I read that story yesterday in the Daily Beast and felt these immediate pings of nostalgia. Politics as usual. Guy's involved with a sex harassment cover-up, and he's disqualified. Like, that used to be the rule. That hasn't been the rule for a long time. It's like, wow, the old rules apply again. Maybe he's disqualified. It seems more like an opportunity for those who don't want to see Shapiro as the vice presidential choice to leak some, I don't say leak, but to highlight some less than flattering material in these final days or hours before a vice presidential pick is made. I doubt this story in and of itself would be something that would disqualify Shapiro from the vice presidential process. Is he still the odds-on favorite? I am terrible at political predictions. So let's start there. He did cancel some events this weekend, but we also saw yesterday there's 4 or 5 potential vice presidential choices who did the same thing. I think Pete Buttigieg has canceled his weekend things, and a few other candidates have done so. There's also a major push inside Illinois from J.B. Pritzker supporters to get him in the vice presidential slot. The story in the Sun-Times today points out he's met with the vice presidential vetting team twice. There was a letter from all sorts of CEOs in Illinois to, again, the vetting team saying, look, he's great for business. He's great for the economy. You're going to love J.B. Pritzker. One of his selling points, of course, is the massive fortune that he controls. That might be slightly less important considering the fundraising numbers we saw yesterday, $370 million, whatever it was, in the month of July for the Harris campaign. So there still is this behind-the-scenes jockeying and which stories are real, which stories are put forward, opposition research. That said, if you were to outline a vice presidential pick who would be a balance for the ticket, geographically important, it also won, and I've talked to a few friends who don't really want to vote for Trump and would kind of be okay with Harris, but not Harris by herself because she is so far to the left. And they're like, well, Shapiro's a guy who his presence would at least make me more likely to vote for Harris as opposed to Trump. Shapiro seems the strategically right person. When this started, if I were Josh Shapiro, I would have said no out of hat because it certainly looked and appeared as if it was an election that was headed toward Democratic defeat. With the fundraising, with some more recent poll numbers, that perhaps is getting more to an even kind of competition at this point, even though the Electoral College map is in favor of former President Trump at this point. I thought Shapiro just might say, I'm not interested. I'd rather take a shot on my own in 2028 or sometime in the future. Since the prospects are better, maybe Shapiro is more likely to say yes, if indeed it is offered. There was the story about Gary Peters being perhaps the senator from Michigan that no one knows. And I think it's the same day that Harris has the event in Pennsylvania. There's also an event scheduled in Michigan. So it's a little head fake to start in Pennsylvania, then head to Michigan where Gary Peters is the guy. I don't know. Yes, if you're placing money down, Shapiro probably is the odds-on favorite. But I think we've seen time and again with these vice presidential selections that nothing's in stone. And there are a lot of head fakes. There's a lot of information from advocates of other candidates who might be trying to push people their way. But, Shapiro, Pritzker certainly appears as if he wants the job if it were offered. Gary Peters, I'm sure, would love to have the job if it were offered. Not a slam dunk yet, but Shapiro seems to be the favorite.
Yeah, Gary Peters, who even people in Michigan aren't sure who that is. And as Jim likes to say, Gary Peters is the name that you would pick if you were put in the witness relocation program because it's so general. And in terms of Shapiro, two other things I think are worth mentioning here. First of all, just this week, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided to reopen a case that Josh Shapiro, when he was Attorney General, concluded was a suicide and not a homicide, even though the victim was stabbed 20 times, Scott. And the coroner decided that at least one of those stab wounds occurred after she died. The other thing that I'll mention again, I mentioned it in passing with Jim the other day, Josh Shapiro's tweet as Attorney General in late October 2020, so just days before the presidential election, if all the votes are added up in Pennsylvania, Trump is going to lose. That's why he's working overtime to subtract as many votes as possible from the process. And that's when all these lawsuits were happening, when the courts, instead of legislatures, were changing absentee ballot rules and so forth. So I don't know if any of that will make a difference. In terms of the sexual harassment case, he's not the one who allegedly did it. He'd be accused of the cover-up. And of course, if they get blowback for that, I'm sure the Democrats will trot out Stormy Daniels and all sorts of other things, Access Hollywood, and try to excuse it that way. The weird thing, and you mentioned Pritzker, you mentioned other people, Buttigieg, I think, is angling for it. Tim Walz has put on a really aggressive campaign. It used to be that people who were under consideration, like, oh, no, I'm totally focused on my Senate job, my governorship, my secretary position, or whatever it is. I'm sure whoever the candidate is will pick a perfect running mate and it'll be great and I'll support the ticket. Now it's like there's this aggressive effort to get on the ticket. So I don't know if it's just ego run amok or it's how they're trying to subtly or not so subtly make the case to the nominee. But it's very different.
I think in this particular case, because of the truncated timetable to make the choice. You could play the long game previously and over the course of 6 months, 8 months, subtly make your case while saying, oh, of course, I've got a very important day job. This is, 3 weeks-ish to get no time to fool around. I want this. Let's go. I'm Tim Walz. Put me on the ticket. The one candidate who didn't do that is Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who has been forceful about saying, no, I'm going to serve out my term. No, I want to stay in Michigan, which, of course, means she'll be the pick.
It could well be.
She's the one that's playing the game the right way.
She would be. She's too busy with her book right now to be busy lobbying publicly for the VP slot. But oh my gosh, that would be quite a pick, and I'm sure you would be thrilled to have a Michigander like her on the ticket. I know that will really excite you.
Peters, Buttigieg, Whitmer. I mean, come on. Michigan's going to be there somewhere, maybe, huh?
Yeah, Buttigieg is technically a Michigan resident.
He's a Traverse City resident now. Yes.
So we'll find out. We'll find out soon enough, and I'm sure all the media puff pieces are all lined up, ready to go for whoever it is. Because if they can turn around, or at least try to turn around Kamala's reputation in the span of a week, whoever her choice is.
Did you know that Gary Peters whips up a mean meatloaf in the kitchen? It's incredible. You should watch him make it. He's a chef, and it's crazy. He's a magician in the kitchen.
Get ready for the next love fest and the next image enhancement from the media. Well, here's something the Democrats aren't going to love. The Bureau of Labor Statistics today, because it is the first Friday of the month, delivering what Ed Morrissey over at Hot Air is calling a big miss on job expectations in the July employment report. Economists expected a job creation number to drift down a little bit. The goal was around 185,000 jobs. Instead, it was 114,000 in July, and unemployment ticked up to 4.3%. And the slide looks even more significant when reviewed against the 2023 data, he says. The unemployment rate rose by 0.2 percentage points, and the number of unemployed people increased by 352,000 to 7.2 million. These measures are higher than a year earlier when the jobless rate was 3.5%, and the number of unemployment people was 5.9%. Now, Scott, over at the White House, of course, the White House is crowing about these numbers. First of all, Biden, in his statement that I'm sure he didn't write, says that he's responsible for the creation of 16 million jobs over the last 3.5 years. Many of those, of course, are COVID bounce-back jobs that were allowed to exist again. But here's his explanation for the fact that people are still dealing with high prices, even though he says inflation has largely been fixed. He says prices are still too high. We will keep fighting to lower costs by, are we going to reduce spending? No. We're going to take on price gouging, capping prescription drug costs, and building more homes. Congressional Republicans are siding with special interests at the expense of the middle class, with more tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations, while threatening Social Security and Medicare. While they try to take us back, we will keep fighting for the future. So he's still trying to blame the corporations and the Republicans for the fact that the economy is slowing a little bit and people are still paying way more than they did 3 years ago. So I don't know that the economy is going to be considered bad enough to make it a real liability in terms of job creation. The inflation issue, of course, is going to be something thrown around Kamala Harris's neck, but I'm sure the media will tell us why it's not her fault. And
there will be questions about whether a recession is around the corner. Now recall, I'm going to forget exactly the months, but we had the 2 quarters of negative growth, which always has been the definition of a recession. And yes. It was Biden. So every economist came out and said, yeah, it's always been this way. But now it's not, because there's a special thing. And so it's not really a recession. So the question is, is there going to be a second recession in the Joe Biden administration? There's something called the SOM rule. And trust me, I'm not an economist, so I'm reading this. This is not my field of expertise. Claudia Somm came up with it. She found that a recession is almost always already underway if the unemployment rate rises by 0.5 percentage point from its low of the past year. It's been triggered in every U.S. recession since 1970. 2 false positives in 1959 and 1969. It was just premature going off a few months before a downturn began. So unemployment, 4.3%. It was 3.5%, I think, July of 23. So that's more than 0.5 percentage point. And the SOM rule would say, hey, that means we're either in recession or recession is coming very, very quickly. The last thing any presidential candidate wants to talk about heading into an election is a recession. Now, even though people and voters are going to be concerned about inflation and jobs and a potential recession, the work is already underway to separate Kamala Harris from the Biden administration. It's crazy. There was a story, I read it in the Sunday Tribune, Chicago Tribune, this past weekend, AP piece. But the point of it was, can you believe Republicans are trying to tie Kamala Harris to the Biden economy? The author was saying, or the reporter was saying that, Republicans have tried a long time to pin inflation on Biden, and now they're trying to pin it on Harris. Can you believe that? And it's just a crazy thing because, just to take a separate issue, but Project 2025, right? Any sort of thin thread to tie this to Trump, they take every opportunity, even though he was not behind it. He did not, design it. He's denounced it, doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But this advisor did this, and this other person who worked for Trump here is part of this. But when it comes to the vice president and how much you can tie her to the economic fortunes of the president, that's crazy. You can't. Why would the vice president have anything to do with the economic fortunes of the president? You can't do that. She's her own person. So look forward to a lot of that the next few months. Kamala, she had nothing to do with the economy. She's her own woman. I don't even think she spent a day in the White House over these past 3.5 years because inflation is still a big deal. The jobs report is worse. I think real wages were down, or at least under expectations as well. So this is not a great report, and we only have a couple of months till the election. So a lot of focus on the economy, a lot of focus on a potential recession, a lot of focus on inflation. The media will work in overdrive to separate Kamala Harris, A, from what's happened the past 3.5 years, and also to B, set up the idea that, oh no, her proposals, her economic philosophy is so different that next 4 years will be fantastic.
It is so different from everything she said 4 years ago.
Right.
In terms of what she wanted. Government mandated jobs and no private health insurance. Oh, I just decided in the last week I'm not for any of that stuff anymore. So I believe the second quarter did come in positive. So by the 2-quarter definition, we won't be in one by November. But if it's negative in the third quarter, that could definitely be an omen of where things are, and we'll see where the monthly job reports are. But the idea that Kamala Harris has no fingerprints on this situation whatsoever is ridiculous. They're now saying, oh, this is never the borders are. She was also in charge of getting people hooked up to broadband with $42 billion in her pocket, and no one has been hooked up. So it almost comes to the consultants in Office Space coming up to Kamala Harris and saying, what is it that you'd say you do here?
It's been noted a few times from various ex-Twitter commentators that the best defense of Kamala Harris is she didn't do anything. She wasn't responsible for anything. She just stood around. That's the best defense possible at this point.
Watch out, Joe Biden. That bus is coming for you. And as you know, it's already come for you once at a very high speed. It'll come for you again if they think they need to. All right, speaking of Kamala, let's get to our crazy martini. And ever since Joe Biden issued the letter stating that he was not going to seek another term, the immediate rally was around Kamala Harris, much to the chagrin of the Obamas. But ever since then, Kamala Harris has done 0 interviews. She has been carefully, tightly scripted in her public appearances. She has, I think, answered one question in passing on a tarmac the day that Trump said he was going to wait to commit to the next debate to see who the actual nominee was in case Kamala got kicked to the side of the road as well. But last night, Biden and Harris were greeting the freed American prisoners out of Russia, Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan and the others. And they finally got Kamala on an unscripted moment about, and it was a simple question, how great is this moment? What do you think about the fact that these people are freed? And
it's the worst sideline reporter question you could possibly ask. How does it feel? I hate that question. How does it feel? So you can say anything here and be fine, right? You can respond to this any way you want because the question is so how does it feel? Okay, anyway, I had to interject.
Exactly. And here's what she says.
This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day.
So I'm getting the idea, Scott, that she thinks diplomacy is significant, but that's not the only thing she thinks is significant, because that ramble, as she tried to think of something more coherent to say and failing, reminds us of this viral moment.
The governor and I, and we were all doing a tour of the library here and talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs. And there is such great significance to the passage of time when we think about a day in the life of our children.
That could have been a 5-second statement instead of 30 just rambling about. So I assume the idea over the next 3 months here is to have as few of these opportunities for the media as possible. So what do you make of that moment? And what do you make of the Harris strategy of trying to keep her away from moments like that?
As has been pointed out again by many, and I don't know who first said this, but Kamala is the student who didn't do the reading assignment and now has been called upon to answer questions and do a presentation and has to talk around the issue and use as many words as possible without actually saying anything of meaning. That's essentially what we hear when she goes off script. You know, she was on the tarmac yesterday, not in the late appearance we just heard, but earlier in the day. And the White House now has this portable lectern that they bring on a tarmac. It's like the White House press secretary who always has to read from the book, no matter what. Oh, let me find the place in the book where I'm supposed to read this thing. So now Kamala has a book that she reads from on the tarmac. She would never survive a full, I don't want to say full vetting, but she'd never survive the full rigors of a 6-month, 8-month campaign, because you're bound to have unscripted moments. You're bound to have the Q&A that is unexpected. And she showed it during the primary in 2020. But this is different. This is a sprint, and it's not a marathon. And the idea is to, just as they attempted to with President Biden, to keep her away from those moments as much as humanly possible. The hurdle is, can you do it in these next 3 months? Can you keep her on script? Can you stop her from babbling? Can you stop her from really showing the American public and voters that she doesn't understand the issues, that she has no depth on these issues, that her plans are completely 180 from what they were 4 years ago? You know, she's on camera, she's on tape, pro-gun confiscation, pro-terrorist voting from prison, which I assume Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or the 9/11 terrorists now would have the opportunity. Well, I guess they're not American citizens, so forget about that. But people like that who would be able to vote. She's pro that outlawing private insurance and nationalizing energy production and all these comments about. She's on record all these places, and you said earlier, she's denounced her positions 4 years ago, but of course she hasn't. An assistant has, a spokesperson has, someone close to the situation speaking on the condition of anonymity has. She hasn't explained any of this now, weeks into this presidential campaign. It's crazy, Greg. She hasn't done a Q&A. She hasn't done a press conference. She hasn't done an interview. Think of the glowing coverage Kamala Harris has received in the past 2 weeks-ish.
Yeah.
She hasn't done or said anything different than 2 months ago when people were saying you can't replace Joe Biden because it's got to be Kamala Harris, and everyone knows she's a dud. And
right.
she's no better. She hasn't done anything different other than a couple of rallies off a teleprompter. That's it. And that's triggered this outpouring of incredibly positive coverage, and the race is turned upside down. And what a different candidate we have. She hasn't said anything. She hasn't defended anything that she said. She hasn't explained where she is on any of these issues in the first person. When is that going to happen? When is she going to do that? And again, for her advisors and the team, probably never would be the right answer. You would hope someone will press to make that happen.
Exactly. So here's what's going to happen probably. That she's going to duck and weave as long as possible. And then eventually she'll give an interview to someone who's largely sympathetic. I'm not saying it'll be quite Joy Reid, but it'll be somebody who's not going to give her a hard time. Then they'll check that box, and then the media will back off for as long as it is. She's not going to. And we talked yesterday about how Trump's appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists was not exactly his finest hour, but she will never sit in front of anyone with remotely aggressive.
She was invited.
She wouldn't even go there.
She wouldn't even go there.
Right.
And she went on a virtual appearance, and they said that she wouldn't even do something like that in front of a clearly friendly audience and friendly group of questioners.
Yeah, absolutely dodging. But I totally agree with you. The how do you feel question, or what does this mean to you after you've won a gold medal or a national championship or whatever it is? Oh, it means everything. It means the world. Well, thanks. That was really an insightful commentary. So journalistic lessons and excellent political commentary from Scott Bertram today. Scott, have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Scott Bertram, General Manager, WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he also lectures in journalism. He's the director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, host of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. He's also the co-host of the Political Beats podcast, and Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. Subscribe and learn more about it at wasn'tthatspecial.com. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They are a huge help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow all of us on X. Scott is at Scott Bertram with just 1 T in Scott. Jim is at Jim Garrity, and I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend, and join Scott and me on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.